Hello everyone, I am Sleepy Shoreline and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to sleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you from and what time are you watching? Now relax and unwind. It was a snowy night when I pulled into the parking lot of my gas station. I worked the overnight 11 to 7 shift and had been at the job for several months before this. I really didn't like this job, but finding somewhere else to work was really difficult. And due to how some things were in other aspects of my life, night shifts were the best for my personal schedule. Still though, I went in tired every night and struggled to get through every shift. I parked in front of the building beside the only other car in the parking lot, which was my co-worker's. Then I went inside and relieved him of his shift. He left a couple minutes later, and then it was just me for the rest of the night. My manager had a paper on the desk with some things to get done, but from reading it over, it wasn't all that much. My guess was that it would take no more than an hour total to complete all the tasks, so I tried to put it off as long as possible to save me from falling asleep once I started getting really tired. But as I sat there behind the desk, and somewhere around 12 a.m., a car pulled into the station. I glanced out the window, seeing an old SUV parked by one of the pumps. Of course, with it snowing outside, most people were not driving around, but getting a customer every once in a while was normal. I went back to my phone and scrolled through some videos, not paying much attention for probably 10 minutes, until I looked back outside and saw the SUV was still there by the pump. The headlights were off and the doors were closed, looking like they should be pumping gas, but it had been so long. I stood up and got closer to the window, looking down both sides of the building, but nobody was anywhere outside. If they had been in their car for the past 10 minutes with it off, they'd have to be freezing. It was snowy, windy, and cold, so I honestly got a little nervous for them. I paid more attention for the next few minutes, waiting to see any movement through the dark windows or for someone to get back inside their car. But there was nothing. It was like the car was just abandoned right next to the pump. After some thought, I put on my jacket and went outside. Immediately, I knew I was right. It was way too cold for anyone to be in there with the car off, or for anyone to even be outside for more than a few minutes. I rushed over to the car and looked around, then put my face close to the window and tried to look inside. Hello? Anyone in there? Just checking to see if you're okay. I called out, but from what I could see, there wasn't anyone inside. It wasn't exactly easy to see, so someone could have been, but I was pretty sure there wasn't. Now even more confused, I backed up and looked around at the empty gas station parking lot before starting to walk back. Now with my eyes not focused on the car, I was just looking at the ground and noticed shoe prints in the snow going toward the building. Not really the front of the building, but kind of off to the side. I looked back and saw that they seemed to come from the car. But at this point I was freezing and didn't want to investigate further without warming up a bit first. Went inside and turned on the small heater next to the counter, putting my hands in front of it to warm them up. I was only inside for 30 seconds to a minute though, before a thump resonated through the building from behind me. I spun around, not seeing anything, then walked around the counter and toward the back. On the floor, there were puddles of dirty water, like snow that had melted off someone's boots. Feeling a chill run through me, I stepped closer to the back room and turned the corner toward where the supply room was. Standing in the dark behind one of the shelves, I could see the outline of a figure. They were tall with broad shoulders and had a large scruffy beard, and they were looking right at me. My heart stopped for a moment, but after the initial shock, my reaction was to just walk back to the counter. I don't know why. Maybe I was just too shocked to react appropriately. After staring at the doorway to the supply room for I don't even know how long, I quietly picked up the store phone and called the police, whispering for help. Then I endured the most unnerving 10 minutes of my life as I waited. During this time, I didn't hear or see anything from the supply room, which honestly added to my fear. For some reason, the man never came out to confront me. When 2 cops finally pulled in and came inside, I quietly told them where the man was. They searched the room while I stayed by the front, but I was shocked when they came out with nobody else. The man was gone. Watery shoe prints surrounded the back door, but outside were fresh tracks in the snow going straight away from the gas station, straight into the completely dark, empty field that led on for miles. Obviously, nobody could search that at night, but even when they did in the following days, they didn't find anything. I mean, the field was huge. He could have gone anywhere. But it was so cold and windy that night that I was almost sure that they'd find a body. The SUV was taken in for hopefully more information. I don't know how or why, but for some reason they couldn't find any history of ownership. So that left us with just what we know from that night. And we are still left with just that. Who the man was and what he was doing remains unsolved. And where he is now is just as much of a question. I worked at a retail store in my 20s as an overnight lead. It wasn't one of your regular big chain grocery stores. It was a local place with only about 8 or 9 locations. Most nights I'd have an overnight stalker to help out, but it wasn't uncommon for me to spend the whole shift alone. Again, not the biggest store, so it really wasn't a very intense working environment. A lot of the time I'd find myself working slow, just so I wouldn't run out of things to do. This was one of those nights where I was alone and working at a steady pace. At the beginning of my shift, I loaded up some boxes and moved into the aisles to start stocking. It doesn't take much mental effort, so my mind was elsewhere and just thinking about random things, not really paying any attention. I went through about 3 aisles until a knock at the front entrance made me jump. I almost didn't even realize what it was because I was so spaced out, but once I did, I got really confused. I heard them knock again, loud enough to echo through the store. I walked down to the end of the aisle and looked through the large front windows, seeing a man in a hood standing at the doors. I went up to the other side. "We're closed. Won't be open until 8 a.m. I said through the glass. The man looked at me but didn't say anything. I pointed at the sign on the door. "We're closed. Sorry," I repeated. The man continued to look at me for a few seconds, then turned and walked away. I watched him walk until I couldn't see him anymore, but it didn't look like he had parked anywhere. The whole thing was odd to say the least, but I figured he was just at the wrong place or something. I went back to what I was doing, stocking up the shelves and eventually forgetting about the man. By 2 a.m., I'd gotten through half of the aisles and was ready to take my lunch break. I left the boxes where they were and went to the break room on the other end of the building. I was in there for probably a good half hour before I tossed the rest of my lunch and went back to work. I walked through the store and to the end of the aisle I was working on, but just as I looked up, there was a man walking past the other end. He looked like he was just walking across the store, not having noticed me. I froze in place, feeling that instant rush of fear. Now listening intently, I could hear the man's footsteps move toward the side of the building I'd just come from, so I moved into the aisle and hid behind the shelves. The footsteps sounded like they went toward the break room, but just before I left the aisle to try and run and get help, I heard the man rushing out of the room. The footsteps were now sprinting through the store, getting closer and closer. I ran for the other end of the aisle, looking back and seeing the man turn in and start running at me. I ran for the front door, getting my keys out and trying to unlock it with shaky hands. The man appeared at the end of the aisle just as I got it open, and just as I stepped out of the building, I saw a bright flash in the corner of my eye and heard a pop sound that made my ears ring. A gunshot, so loud I didn't even know where it landed, but I sprinted for my life around the building. I made it to my car and hid in the back seat as I called 911. From what I know, the man didn't follow me outside. He was gone by the time police made it to the store, but they found the back door to be busted open, along with some heavy tools sitting next to it. The most terrifying of their findings was the hole created by the gunshot, sitting right to the side of the front doors. Why the man broke in and was so aggressive, targeting me like that, is unknown. From his behavior, the police seemed to think it was some kind of mental breakdown or psychotic break, not having any real reason to target me specifically, other than the fact that I was alone. I no longer work there, but I can tell you that for the years following that incident, I was on edge every single night. I worked at a restaurant with my older brother during our high school years. It was a really small restaurant in an outlet shopping center. We were both waiters then, but since the place was small, we often helped out all around, doing dishes, deliveries, or whatever they needed. But after just a year of working there, my brother graduated high school and chose to go to college, so he quit, but I kept working there. This happened a few months before I eventually left the job. It was Friday, so I was working a later shift than I usually did on other weekdays. The restaurant was open until 12 every night, but because of school, I usually never stayed later than 8 or 9. Anyway, I was scheduled to close this night alongside the manager. Everything was pretty normal, slowing down by 8 and getting a few people picking up orders for the rest of the evening. But at 10:30, my manager picked up a phone call for a delivery. By 11, I was driving out of the parking lot and onto the road. The address I was given on the receipt was just 8 minutes away, but as I drove a couple minutes down the road, I got a call from my manager. I answered right away, thinking they must have canceled, but apparently the guy called back saying he'd given the wrong address. I had to pull over and write down the new address. I typed in the new street and number into the GPS, but right away, I knew something was off. It wasn't close at all. It was 25 minutes away in the opposite direction of where I was going. If they had given this address to begin with, the order would have never been accepted. I thought about just going back to the restaurant and telling my manager, knowing he would understand, but I was already out and we already made the order, so I just started driving. The roads were already pretty empty around town at this time of night, but the further out I drove, the roads became even more empty. Like I didn't even see any more cars for the last 5 minutes of the drive. I was on the far edge of town, where most of the buildings and houses turned to grassy fields and trees. When I approached the road with the address, all I could see were a row of houses with all the lights off. As I drove down and past more of the houses, a few of them did have their porch lights on, but it still felt empty. It's worth mentioning that these were not the nicest houses either by any means. They were all single-story, box-style homes. I pulled up to the one I was to deliver to and parked on the side, getting out with the food. I felt this strange, eerie sense as I walked up to the door. It was quiet outside, and with no street lights and barely any house lights, it was really dark. I knocked on the door and waited. A whole minute passed with no signs of anyone being home, and I was starting to get a little bit more uneasy, so I just set the bag down and turned to walk back to my car. They hadn't paid yet, but the food was probably cold and it was no use to me anyway. When I looked over at my car though, a man was standing right behind it. He was leaned over like he was looking into the window. I stopped, and I don't know if the man heard me or what, but he immediately looked up at me. I could barely make out his face, but he was older. "Do you need something?" The man didn't move. I asked again, but nothing changed. Feeling that eerie sense getting bigger, I looked around, but didn't see anything other than trees in the dark. Then the man took a few steps back, moving away from my car and standing maybe 5 feet from the door. After a moment, I started walking over slowly, hoping to just get in and leave. As I got right up to the door, the man continued to stare at me from just a few feet away. I cautiously opened the door and rushed inside, but before I could even turn it on, the guy started yelling. I looked over at him, seeing him now facing the woods and just screaming. I turned my head slightly to look where he was looking, and in the woods, I could see 2 or maybe even 3 figures hurrying toward my car. My immediate thought was that this was a setup, and I needed to leave instantly before something happened. I quickly turned it on and reversed out, just as the man next to me tried to move behind the car in an attempt to stop me. I was able to get out, seeing and hearing the group of men yelling at me as I sped away. Cops were called, and although not much was able to be found, there were a few things. The house I was to deliver to apparently was a vacant property. It wasn't technically abandoned, but the owners didn't even live in the state anymore. It wasn't for sale either. It was just left as is, rotting away for the past decade. The caller that placed the order is unknown, but the initial address he gave seemed to have no significance. Who the group was, what they planned to do, and so many other things are left with no resolution, but I'll probably be wondering about it for the rest of my life. After all, had anything played out even a little bit differently, I may not even be here right now. I was working late one night in my office, trying to finish writing a report I was due in a few days. I had some tea to help keep me energized and was trying to get it all done as fast as possible. Staying up late was a regular thing I had to do for work, and it's always been difficult for me to maintain focus once I start getting tired. Anyway, as I worked in my office, and somewhere around 11, there was a knock at the front door. I got up and looked down the hallway. I didn't know why anyone would be at my door at this time. I walked down to the other end of the house and looked out the peephole, but nobody was outside on my porch. I took a step back and thought that it may have not actually been the front door. I was so focused on work and was on the opposite side of the house, so when I heard the light knocking sound, I just assumed it was someone at the door. I didn't know what else it could have been, but I just went back to my office and started working again. Maybe I should have been more worried about what the knock was, but I was so tired and wanting to get my work done that it wasn't even on my mind after a few minutes. I stayed on the computer, typing away for the better part of an hour. Nothing else seemed to happen as far as the knocking went, but I was getting exponentially more tired by the minute. My workflow was slowing, and my eyes were getting heavy, but just when I was going to call it a night, I reached over for my tea, and right in the window across the room was a pair of eyes staring back at me. All I could tell from the moment was that it was a man, but he quickly ran away from the window after I saw him. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I just sat there with my eyes locked on the window. It was so unexpected, I was almost in a daze. After a moment, I stood up and ran over to cover the window. I didn't know who that was, or why he was looking into my house like that, but it being almost midnight made it all the more terrifying. I left my office and went to the front of the house, looking out the peephole again to see if they'd gone to my front yard, but I didn't see him. I then went to a window on the back of the house and looked around, but again, there was no one out there. My adrenaline was pumping, and I was not tired at all anymore, but the now silence of the house was starting to freak me out. Did the man leave, or was he still outside? I went back to my office and got my phone, then started making my way back to the front door. My plan was to call the cops while keeping my eyes on the doors and windows, but as I got to the end of the hallway, I was met by a large figure standing in the back of the living room. He was tall and wearing thick clothes to hide his identity, but his eyes were not the same as the ones I'd seen in the window. This was someone else. The man didn't hesitate, charging across the room at me as I turned and ran for my office, locking the door behind me and pressing my body against it, preparing for them to try kicking it down. As they approached the door, though, they slowed to a stop and just stood right outside of it. I could hear them breathing, then starting to walk back and forth like they were pacing in the hallway. But then I heard it again. A light knocking sound on the other side of the house. The man outside the door started to walk down the hallway back toward the living room. Then it was silent. For a few minutes, as I stayed there against the door, there was absolutely nothing. I called the cops, whispering into my phone and begging them to come quickly. I waited for about 5 minutes before I heard the sirens approaching my house. As they unlocked my front door and came in, there were no altercations. I heard them walk through the house and finally up to my door, and they never saw either of the men. To this day, I still don't know how the one man got in, or what the two of them were trying to do. I think the knocking was their way of communicating from inside and outside the house, but then that makes me question what the first knock was that I heard. The whole situation freaks me out every time I think about it, wondering how long the one had been watching me for, and how long the other man had been inside my house. It could have ended up so much worse for me, so I know I got lucky, but it's hard not to think about the possibility of them coming back. And luck isn't what I want to rely on for my safety. This only happened a few months ago. I recently moved into a very small one-story house that was close to my place of work. I used to have to drive almost an hour every day, so this move was really nice. The only thing was that I'd never really been anywhere in the area outside of where I worked, so it really was like moving to a completely different place. Anyway, this night I got off at 6 and drove straight home. I had to work again the next day, so I wasn't planning on doing much, probably just chill and eat for a bit, then get in bed. I pulled into my garage and went inside, warming up some leftover pizza in the oven. But while it was heating up, there was a ring at my doorbell. It actually made me jump because I hadn't heard the doorbell before, but I had no idea who would be here either. I walked down to the front door and looked. It was a woman. She looked maybe 50 and had long gray hair. I opened the door. How can I help you? She smiled wide and said she'd noticed I moved in recently. We talked for a minute as she asked about where I came from, if I had a wife or kids, and all that random small talk. Then she said goodnight and walked off. I never really had the chance to ask her who she even was, but I assumed she was just some old lady that lived down the block. But something about her, though, just felt off. I don't know how else to describe it, but I wasn't sure if there was actually something off, or if it was just because she was old. I went back to the kitchen and got my pizza, then sat on the couch and started looking for a good video on YouTube to watch. I found some random commentary video to run as background noise while I ate, but only 10-ish minutes passed before I noticed a noise from outside. I paused the TV and listened, realizing it was an idle car engine, but it was really loud. I got up and looked out the front window. There was a car parked right in front of my house. It was running, but all the headlights were off. I looked down both sides of the road, seeing the whole street was empty, with tons of other places to park. Yet they had chosen right in front of my house. I watched the car for a couple minutes. With no changes, I went back to the couch. A whole half hour went by, with the car's engine still being audible right outside the house, until it suddenly shut off. I paused the TV again and listened, not hearing anything else. After a minute, I got up and walked over to the window, looking out and seeing the car exactly how it was before, except it obviously wasn't running anymore. Again, nobody else was outside. It was just this one car. I shut the blinds just to make sure nobody was watching me for some reason. Then I went back to the couch and started cleaning up. But there was only a moment before a quiet thump sounded from the other side of the house. Already feeling a little on edge, I walked over to the hallway and looked down toward the kitchen. For a split second, I saw the shadow of someone walking away from the back door, as if they'd noticed me and were trying to hide. Their footsteps quickly ran around the house toward the front, and when I looked out the window, I saw a man getting inside the parked car, driving away immediately. The first thing I did was go to the back door and open it, trying to figure out why he was out there. And it only took me a few seconds to notice that the handle on the outside was really loose, like they had been trying to take it off. Even just by pulling the flimsy handle a bit to the side, I could see the inner workings of the lock in the door, meaning he probably would have been able to unlock it, and he was only moments away from getting inside my house. I can't say for certain if the old lady from before had anything to do with it. I know it sounds strange that she would, but I thought about the questions she was asking me, which all had to do with whether anyone else lived with me. Maybe she was getting information to know if I was a good target for whatever they planned. It's been a few months since, and I've never seen her or the man again. For the past decade, I've lived a quiet life in Utah. I own a small cabin in a town of people living the same life as me. There's a town center for shops and everything, but most people have cabins or houses a few miles out with either farms or just plain land. I didn't farm or anything, but I do have a lot of grassy land that borders some mountains. This happened almost 10 months ago now. It was around 8 p.m. one night, and I was sitting outside by the fire pit on my laptop. I did this almost every night, except when it was snowing out. It was always a calming way to end the evening before going to bed. But this night was different. I was out there for an hour, really zoned in on my laptop, when through the crackling campfire, I heard something in front of me. I lifted my head, seeing a man standing on the other side of the flame, maybe 15 feet across from me. The man looks like a typical guy in his 40s that lived around here, big and rugged with a large gray beard. I stood up from my chair. "What are you doing here? Where did you even come from?" I said, trying to hide the shakiness of my voice. The man stared at me with a look I'd only assume was that of someone about to do something terrible, but then he looked past me at my house. I kept my gaze on him as he began walking toward the front of the cabin. He went up to one of the windows and quickly peered inside, saying something under his breath as he turned and started to walk away. I called out again, asking what he was doing, and threw in some unfriendly words, but the guy just ignored me. He walked down all the way to where the grass met the trees, and then he was gone. It was completely insane. Some guy being out here right by my house was no accident, especially not at this time of night, and the way he was acting was beyond strange. It was like he was looking for something and had no fear of intruding on me. I put out the fire right away and went inside, locking up the cabin and getting my sidearm out just in case. I didn't think he was going to come back, but I wasn't sure about anything anymore. As far as the police go, calling them out here would take way too long to be a viable option. If something were to happen, I was on my own, as that's just the way things are here. I stayed up for several more hours, way past the time I usually went to bed, and kept my eyes and ears open for anything. I don't remember the time, but it had to be at least 1 a.m., maybe even 2 a.m., when I finally passed out on the couch. I was trying my hardest to stay awake, but it just didn't happen. When I woke up though, there was an unusual, constant sound. Wind blowing through the house. I sat up, still confused and tired, and looked over at the front door. It was wide open. I jumped up and ran to the door, looking outside in all directions, but not seeing anything in the dark. I slammed it shut and locked it, then turned around to face the possibility of someone being inside my house. I stood there by the door for an entire minute, listening for any sounds of someone being inside. It was a small cabin, so even something like heavy breathing might be loud enough to hear. But it was dead silent, only the creaking of the wood from the wind outside. I slowly stepped through the hallway and into each room, checking every corner and opening every door, but nobody was inside. After that, I stayed up all night, and as soon as the sun came up, I drove into town and filed a report with the police, making the assumption that the man I'd seen that night was likely the one who broke into my cabin. The one issue with all of it is the motive. There were a few odd things missing, which meant he definitely had broken in and walked around the house while I was passed out, but nothing they took was worth any real value. And of course, they didn't harm me either, so what they intended is still undetermined. And without knowing why they came to my cabin, there's no saying whether or not they'll come back. I went to a pretty big college. It was several hours from the city where I'm from, and a few of my high school classmates also went there. This is something that happened during my junior year. I lived in a house with 3 of my friends, 2 of which went to high school with me as well. It was a 2-story house that we lived in, and somewhat small, but enough space for all of us. When the school year started, I had a lot of students in most of my classes because of how big our school was. One class in particular had about 200 kids in it. I would go to the lectures each time on Mondays and Wednesdays when they were held, and I would usually sit in the same spot. It was a large room with many seats in it. Over time, I would see a lot of the same faces in class, but I didn't really have any good friends in this particular class. One of the people who would always seem to sit around me was this one guy. He would usually sit a few rows behind me, and he was sort of tall and had dark brown hair. I never really paid much attention to him, but I just recognized him. But I began noticing him more when he started to seemingly be following me home. It started one day after class when I walked out of the building and just happened to notice him walking behind me. I would drive to class and back because I lived off campus, so I would go to a parking lot, get in my car, and then leave. He happened to park near me, so he did the same. As far as I knew, this was just a coincidence. I would never pay attention to who was driving behind me. But there was this one time that I didn't go straight home, but went to the school cafeteria instead. I noticed this guy walked behind me the whole time, and he also went to the cafeteria. I still didn't think much of it and thought it was maybe a coincidence. After I got inside and got food, I'm not really sure which way he went because I was just minding my own business. But the very next day of class that we had, I left to go straight home and went to my car. For whatever reason, I noticed the guy again as he went to his car, which was parked a little ways from mine. But this time, I noticed him driving behind me all the way until I got to my place. When I parked on the side of the street in front of our house, he kept driving past me. One of the next times that we had class, he followed me in his car again, but I wasn't driving back to my place this time. This time I went to a gas station to get gas, and he just happened to do the same thing. Something about this seemed really weird. Was it a coincidence, or was he always following me? I decided to ask around the class the next time that we had it. There were a few people who I usually sat by. They weren't necessarily friends, but I would occasionally talk to them about things from the class. I pointed out the guy to them and asked if they knew anything about him. None of them did, though. I brought the guy up to my roommates as well, but they didn't seem to have any idea who the guy was. It was a mystery to me. But then, the guy just stopped showing up to class. I remember he wasn't there for like 4 or 5 times in a row. I wondered why, but I was actually glad that he wasn't in class anymore, because he was seeming to be following me. Then, one night I was returning home from my on-campus part-time job that I had. It was dark out. When I got to my street, I saw a man walking down the sidewalk in front of our house. As I got closer, I noticed it was the same guy. I did not want to park my car in the street close to him, or have to see him at all, so I kept driving and passed by our house. I couldn't believe that I saw him. I was telling myself that he must have lived close to me in this general neighborhood. After I left our street, I drove around the block to get back to our street again. It took me maybe a minute or so, and I was expecting the guy to be gone when I got back. But when I pulled around again, he was still there. He was just kind of standing around, or pacing almost. The area that he was in was right by where I parked my car every day. I had a really bad feeling, and I didn't want to take any chances, so I kept driving and decided not to go home. Instead, I headed back towards campus and called one of my roommates. I told her about the guy in front of our house, and she went to check out the front window and told me that she saw him. She did not know who he was, and told me she would let me know if he went away. I got a call about 20 minutes later that he had finally left the area. Then, once more, I drove back home. After getting back, I looked around the street and was quick to get inside the house. I didn't see the guy at all. Not too long after that, I went upstairs to go to bed. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but one of my roommates soon woke me up. She told me that the guy was back and that she had already called the police. I was really confused at first and didn't know what was going on, but she led me into her bedroom, which had a window that looked out to the back of our house. In the backyard, we looked down and saw the guy was standing at the back door, seemingly trying to open it. She said he had been there for a while. It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning at that time. We waited upstairs and hoped that the guy wouldn't get in, and luckily, he didn't. When we heard the sound of a car driving down the street, it stopped by our house, and then we saw the man try to run away. However, he ended up being stopped by the police not too far from our house. I remember I heard that he claimed he was trying to get to his friend's house, and he mixed up the address. We all knew that was a lie. It turned out the guy didn't even go to our school and was never enrolled there. All those times he was in class with me, who knows what his real intentions were. This is something that happened during my freshman year of college. It was a few years ago now, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. At the time, I went to a university with about 10,000 students. For my first year, I lived in an all-female dorm building on the 3rd floor. There were 4 floors total, and I had my own dorm room all to myself. On probably the 3rd or 4th week of school, I went to bed one night just like any other. It was a weeknight, but I don't remember exactly what day. I woke up though at around 3 o'clock in the morning and really had to use the bathroom. The bathrooms were just a ways down the hallway, so I got out of bed and headed to the door. When I got out into the hallway, it was empty and things were very quiet. I had to walk maybe between 50 and 100 feet to get to the bathrooms. Once I was there, the bathrooms that we had was basically a room with 5 doors and a sink. Each door was its own little private bathroom. Nobody was inside, and all of the doors were open when I got there. Not surprising for it being 3 o'clock in the morning. As I was inside one of the rooms, I heard footsteps come from the hallway. Whoever it was then entered the bathrooms and went into one of the rooms across from me. I didn't think too much of it. I was inside for maybe a minute and then left. When I did, the other person was still inside the one across from me. Basically, right when I got back into the hallway, I heard the other bathroom door open. Then, when I was maybe 30 feet away from the bathrooms walking to my room, I heard them start walking in the hallway behind me. I still didn't think much of it at the time, and I expected it to be another girl. But something about it just seemed odd. I don't really know why. I looked over my shoulder to see who it was, but when I did, I saw that it was a man. And it wasn't a college-aged man either. This guy looked much older than me. I was really confused by this. I turned back and kept walking for my room. But instantly, I heard the man speed up his steps. He was walking pretty fast and starting to gain on me. I got a really bad feeling and I sped up as well. By now, I was pretty close to my door, and I hadn't locked it, with me only going to the bathroom. That was good, meaning I could get inside faster. I could hear the man still getting closer and closer to me, and I started to feel panic setting into my mind. Now, I was only about 10 feet away, and the guy was less than 20 feet behind me. When I got to the door, I quickly opened it, got inside, and then shut the door and locked it behind me. Probably a second later, the guy stopped right outside my door. He then tried opening the door, and my heart started racing even faster than it already was. Then he knocked on it. I had no clue who this guy was or what he wanted. I knew that he wasn't supposed to be here, though. I chose not to answer the door. I also didn't bother to ask him what he was doing or who he was. There was about 30 seconds of silence after he knocked. I was hoping that he would have gone away, but then he knocked on the door again. It wasn't a very loud knock at all, and after he knocked, I walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. He was sort of short and wearing a black jacket and had sort of blonde hair. I didn't know who he was. He definitely didn't work at the school or anything either. He knocked again for a third time. I really wanted him to just go away. There was no way that I was going to be able to get any sleep with this guy here. He didn't say anything the entire time, but was just standing there. I went away from the door and sat on my bed. I waited, and the guy didn't knock for a really long time. But when I went back over to the door and looked out, thinking maybe he was gone, the guy was still there. I didn't know what to do. I walked back over to my bed. Then the guy knocked one more time. It was really quiet, and I just barely heard it because of how quiet it was. I didn't get up to look. I stayed where I was, and probably 10 more minutes went by. I didn't hear any noises and got up to look again. That's when I saw that the guy was finally gone. After that, I was finally able to get back to sleep. The next morning, I found my resident advisor and told her about the man. She said that she was going to report it. Luckily, I never saw the guy again after that. A few days later, though, I found out that the man had been let into the building much earlier that night. He had told a student that his daughter lived there, and he had to give her something. The student let him in, believing his story. It turned out that it was a complete lie, and he must have hid somewhere for hours. I get really creeped out thinking about it. Campus security was informed of the situation, but I never heard anything more of it. In fall of 2019, I was a freshman in college. I went to a smaller school, and I lived in the dorms. I had a roommate named Danny, who was a real jerk. But that's not the horror story. Sure, it was annoying to be in that small dorm room with Danny. He would talk a lot and pester me on purpose a lot of times. Because of this, I tried to spend as much time away from my dorm room as possible. I would do all my studying in different places around campus. Spots to sit and get work done were everywhere, in just about every building. Even if I wasn't doing homework, I could sit and watch YouTube videos or whatever. I preferred it to being in my dorm room if Danny was there. I got into a routine of this after probably the first month. So one night, I remember that I was doing homework in this one building. It was a building that a lot of our classrooms were in and had several different subjects. There were about 4 floors to it, and I was up on the 3rd or 4th floor, but I don't remember which one. I was in a comfortable chair that had a table attached to it. It was built for studying and stuff. There were a few of these types of chairs that looked out a window that had a nice view of campus. I took a break at about 6 p.m. and went to the dining hall to eat. I met up with a friend there, and then afterwards went back to the same building at the same spot that I was at before to finish my homework. The buildings didn't close if you were a student. You could stay there as long as you wanted. By now, especially up on one of the top floors, things were very quiet and nobody else was really around. I kept working and was there until probably like 9 p.m. As I worked, I had my headphones in and played some music in the background. Sometimes I would do that and sometimes I wouldn't. It just depended on what I was doing and how I felt. So right after I was done and I took my headphones out, I heard footsteps behind me immediately. The walkway went behind me, and one direction led to some classrooms and the other led to some stairs. The footsteps were coming from the hallway with some classrooms in it. I started picking up my laptop and putting things into my backpack. As I did, the footsteps got closer and closer. It didn't seem like the person was going to walk by me though. It almost seemed like they were going to approach me instead. I turned around to look and see who it was. All I saw though was somebody ducking around a corner behind a beam. I didn't get a look at the person, but just saw part of them for like a second. This was kind of weird. I finished putting my things in my backpack and then stood up, looking to where I saw the person again. I still saw nothing. Then I walked over to the stairs and left the building. I went back to my dorm after that. But the very next day, there was a similar experience. This time, after studying in a different building, I went to the Performing Arts building to study that night. This building was almost always pretty quiet. There were much less classrooms inside of it, and unless there was a concert or something going on, not many people would be there. I studied in peace for basically the whole time, and saw only about 2 or 3 people walking by in the entire time that I was in there. For the last 2 hours probably, I saw nobody at all. The location that I was studying in was on the first floor and next to a staircase where there was a table and chair set up for studying. It was kind of out of the way, but there was a hallway going past and another one that connected. I did not have my headphones in this time and could hear everything around me. Things were very quiet, and it soon got to be kind of late. At one point though, I heard footsteps coming from down the hallway. Just when these footsteps were about to get into my view though, they stopped. It was like just around the corner where I couldn't see. There was no room that I was aware of right there either. It was like the person had just stopped in their tracks. If they went back the other way or moved at all, I would have heard them. What were they doing? Were they just standing there? I had no idea. I decided to pack up my stuff and head back to my dorm. When I did, I didn't hear anything. Luckily for me, I did not have to walk past that hallway, and I would be going the other way. When I left, as soon as I started heading down the hallway, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they followed me, but were still out of my sight. Then I heard them start to get closer and within my view. I turned around to see who it was that was there. I did it very quickly to not be weird, so I didn't get a good look at the person. But I did see them. There was a tall and thin-looking guy, walking a little ways back behind me. It seemed as though he was walking pretty fast. This was way too weird, and as I walked, I passed by an exit door. It wasn't one of the main entrances or exits to the building, but at the last moment, I turned and I left. Once I was out of there, I headed back for the main area of campus. The guy didn't leave the building, whoever it was. I wondered if this was the same person who had been there the previous night. I went back to my dorm room, and after that, decided to take a break from studying around campus at night. As much as I didn't like to study in my dorm room with Danny, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. But the story doesn't quite end there. A few days later, I had classes like normal and was gone for most of the day. I returned to our dorm in the late afternoon, and Danny was there. When I got into the room, he told me that someone had come by and asked for me. Apparently, somebody knocked on our door, and when Danny answered, a guy asked if I was there. I asked Danny what the guy looked like, and he said tall and thin, and basically described the same guy that I had seen the other night. I asked if the guy said what he wanted with me. He didn't say though. Apparently, he just walked away. After that, I never saw the man again. This happened just a couple of years ago. I was in college at the time, but went to a smaller school. I have a good friend group from high school, and we remain close to this day, but several of us went to different colleges. A few went to a much bigger school, which was a little bit more fun to hang out at. It was only about an hour away from the college that I went to, so on a few occasions I went and visited for a weekend. I remember that one time during I believe my 3rd year of college, I went to visit 2 of my friends, Jake and Sam, at the larger school. I went down on Friday after classes and hung out with my friends later that day. We were going to go to the university football game the next day on Saturday. But before that, on Friday night, my friends and a few of their college friends were going out to some of the local bars. We left to go there at probably like 10 p.m. and we decided to walk because I was told it would only take about 10 minutes. I was with Jake and Sam to start, But Sam soon left us because he said he had to stop and get something at one of his friend's dorms quick, so he would meet us there. Our route to getting there went right through the center of campus. Now, I've been there a couple of times in the past, but this school was very large, and I didn't know the campus all that well. At this hour, things were dark, and really nobody else was around, other than some people on the main sidewalks. We took a shortcut through a courtyard near some buildings, which I assumed had classrooms in them, but I wasn't really sure. I suddenly really had to use the bathroom, and when we passed by a building, I asked Jake if I could use the bathroom in one of the buildings. He was like, "Sure, go ahead." I didn't really know what the buildings were or if they would be locked, but when I went to the door and tried it, it was open. Jake then got a phone call and he stayed outside. I told him that I would be right back, and I entered the building. When I got inside, there were a few hallways and a lounge type of area. I didn't know exactly what type of building it was still. Nobody else seemed to be inside. There was no bathroom in immediate sight, so I started walking around to try and find one. I kept expecting one to be right around the corner or really close by, but there just wasn't one. At last, after probably 5 minutes of wandering around the building, I found a bathroom. I used it and was back out in less than a minute, but now I didn't really know how to get back. I thought that I knew the way and started going there, but I soon heard footsteps coming. They were walking kind of fast in my direction. I didn't know if I was even supposed to be in here, and I wasn't a student at the school, so I decided to wait out of sight. I went back around the corner, hoping for the footsteps to pass by. Instead of passing me though, they turned the corner and headed to where I was. In a split-second decision, I moved back and went up a staircase, which happened to be right there. After walking up, I was now a floor higher, and everything looked mostly the same on the second floor. But I heard the footsteps starting to walk up the stairs. They were also moving faster than before. Somebody seemed to be after me for some reason. I started to worry that I really wasn't supposed to be in this building and would get in trouble. I walked as fast as I could without running through a random hallway. I was trying to make my way back towards the entrance and find another staircase or something. When I went down a couple more hallways, I heard the person behind me go down each way that I went. They were still a ways back though and couldn't see me. I didn't know who this person was that was chasing me. I kind of thought that it was silly and I considered just stopping and seeing who it was. But for some reason, I just felt like that wasn't a good idea. For some reason, I felt like I was maybe in danger. I kept walking, changing hallways every so often. I tried going in a random room at one point, but it was locked. Then, I came up on an elevator. I decided to take it and push the button. Thankfully, it opened immediately. If I would have had to wait, I probably would have just moved on. I got inside and started pushing the button for the first floor over and over. Meanwhile, I heard the footsteps coming from down the hallway. They were moving faster and faster, and then they started running. Whoever this was now sprinting towards me. Finally, the elevator doors started to close. At about that same time, the person had entered the hallway that I was in. The doors just barely closed on time. When they were maybe an inch open, I heard whoever it was get right outside and then just barely saw them. I couldn't tell anything about them though, just that they were right outside. They grabbed at the door, but it was too late. I felt a huge wave of relief as the elevator started moving down. But at the same time, I heard the person sprinting away from the elevator. I was guessing that they were now going to the nearest staircase. When the elevator door opened, to my surprise, I could see the exit. I think it was the same door that I had gone in. I turned to the right and started walking. That's when I heard footsteps coming from a ways to the left. Whoever it was that was chasing me was almost down the stairs. That's when I started to run. I sprinted towards the exit and heard the other person sprinting in my direction now. Just when I was about to get to the door, I saw something go flying past my head and I heard a loud smash. Whoever this person was had thrown a small lamp at me. It just missed my head and hit the wall just a couple of feet away. I opened up the door and sprinted outside. My friend Jake was still on the phone, but a ways down, probably like 50 feet. He saw me running and looked confused. But as I was approaching him still, I saw the look on his face as he saw somebody come barreling out of the building behind me. Then he started running with me. We were both pretty fast, and now that we were outside, had many more options on where to run. We quickly made a right and ran a ways, then made it to another street. When we did, we finally stopped and realized that the person wasn't chasing us anymore. Jake asked me what that was all about, and I told him that I didn't know. We were able to meet up with our other friends after that. but I felt really lucky to have made it out of that situation okay. I really don't know who that person was. The crazy thing is that I never even saw them. Jake told me that it was a man, and he said that he didn't get a real good look at him, but he said the guy looked insane. I will take his word for it. The fact that the guy threw a lamp at me is really bad. It could have injured me, and I'm glad that the guy didn't catch up with me either. Who knows what he would have done? I also feel like the guy was not supposed to be in the building. I didn't see him for the rest of the time that I was there that weekend. Since then, I've been back at that college a couple of times, but I will never forget that experience. As much as I enjoyed my job as a barman, I wasn't too fond of working holidays. The pub I worked at was always busy during the festive season because our kitchen offered a huge carvery and families flocked to the opportunity of being served a feast. We usually allowed random walk-ins, but on the day before Christmas in 2021, our tables were filled up and we were bustling to the point we had to close the doors to reservations only. Around my bar, I had all sorts of characters seated, mostly loners, clearly without company for the night. One man sat in the corner of my left wing and made comments to every female that came up to order a drink. He was balding and aging gracefully. His teeth were stained yellow and his nose wrinkled in permanent disgust. I kept an eye on him as he complimented one lady on her hairstyle, and she shot me a look that almost begged for assistance from this old creep. "Would look nice on you too, pal," I responded on her behalf while sliding the lady her drink, and she quickly hurried away after flashing me a smile in gratitude. "You just want them all to yourself." He finally spat at me. He was obviously referring to the woman I just helped escape with his remarks. "Don't know what you mean," I answered, and tended to a customer at his side. I had no intention of getting into it with this man. I resumed fixing up drinks for a large table when I saw from the corner of my eye, as the old man dipped white powder into a cocktail I had served the woman next to him. She was waiting with her back towards the bar, and because she was having a conversation with a friend, she hadn't heard me present the drink. My blood boiled, and I acted quickly, rushing to grab the drink and tossing it before pouring a new one. I had it ready just as she spun around to pick it up and wander off. Fuming, I wanted so badly to call him out, because I knew the best course of action would be to alert the authorities. I halted service and stepped aside to phone the police, who usually responded fairly quickly to these reports, but tonight they were delayed, like we do to it being Christmas and all. When I manned the bar again, the old man was still there, shooting daggers with his gaze. He ordered a whiskey, and so I begrudgingly poured him one. As I was sliding it over the counter, I considered telling him to leave, but I also wanted him there for the cops' arrival. I was still weighing my options when suddenly I was hit in the face with excruciating pain. My eyes stung and my vision blurred. The old creep had flung the drink right at me, shattering the glass square in my face. "Mind your own damn business," he snarled, but I couldn't focus my view on him as he disappeared into the crowd. A colleague rushed over to help me clear the alcohol from my eyes. There were cuts down my cheeks from broken glass, but luckily no damage was done to my sight. I was taken home and left just a little shaken up. The following night I went in to cover my shift, even though management told me to take the day off, but I'm very stubborn and my parents lived a while away, so I didn't exactly feel like spending Christmas night alone. That evening was far more relaxing than the previous night. Spirits were great. Customers and co-workers alike all passed me small gifts, and the night ended on a high note. By closing time, I offered to lock up, and nobody protested. A colleague told me to just ring the last customer up before thanking me, and clocking out. I reached the farthest booth in the pub and saw with immediate alarm that the last customer was the same man from last night. His eyes were inflamed, and he sat motionless at the table, watching me approach with a sinister smile. My body tensed up, and I gulped down fear, trying desperately to hide my nerves and play it cool. I told him I needed to settle the bill as we were closing. He was unresponsive and only sat there smiling at me. As I went to ring him up, he uttered, "You should have minded your own business." My actions may be questionable to some people, yet I had little choice in the situation. With sweaty palms, I offered him one last drink on me, but then he would have to leave. He simply nodded. I led him up to the bar where you could take a seat, and I went around to pour him a whiskey. As I watched him gulp down the drink, there came a long moment of silence before he swiftly reached over the counter and grabbed me by the collar. The punches came before I could react. An agonizing blow hit my nose, and I blocked the incoming attacks the best I could. His hand moved from my shirt to my throat, and I began to see black as he strangled me. Thankfully, his grip eased up just as the pressure became unbearable, and then his hold loosened. With a growl, he slumped forward, unconscious. I found no pulse when I checked him, and I closed off the night by dumping his body in the alleyway of a neighboring pub. I knew the staff would find him and suspect alcohol poisoning. In serving his drink, I managed to slip a couple of pills into his glass from behind the bar, giving him back a taste of his own medicine, though I never intended on killing the man. I'm choosing to share this story anonymously because maybe, just maybe, the guilt still haunts me. Although some might argue that I did society a favor. At the age of 30, I hit a new low in my life. I lost my career due to medical reasons, and my boyfriend broke up with me. After he moved out of our one-bedroom apartment, I knew I wasn't going to be able to make rent living alone. Luckily, one of my friends put in a good word for me at the corporate store his dad owned, and soon I was hired as general manager a month before Christmas. It was the perfect new start, and I began picking up the pieces of myself. The job was great, but since my friend really overstated the tragic story of my situation in order for me to get the position, nearly everyone in the workforce knew what I was going through. One man in particular, Paul, immediately took a liking to me. He was painfully average looking, not necessarily unattractive, but you could tell he didn't have the best self-care. His clothes were sizes too large and clung loosely to his body. His acne-ridden skin probably never saw a bottle of moisturizer, and he carried himself with terrible posture. Despite his unkempt appearance, Paul was really nice, if not awkwardly chivalrous. He went out of his way to make sure I settled into the role, backing me up with every task that required the stern voice of a manager. He was an introvert and didn't interact with other employees at all. Yet we got on pretty well and ate lunch together almost every day. When Christmas drew near, the company planned a secret Santa. They sent out emails one night with names of our randomly assigned persons, along with the gift cost amount. Although the money was tight, I really enjoyed the concept. I hadn't spoken much to the girl whose name I got, but I had a cute teddy bear tucked away somewhere that I was planning on gifting her along with chocolate. I got up from my laptop and began searching the closet. While looking through the box of clothes, I suddenly realized that I hadn't seen my cat, Cheddar, in days. He wasn't an indoor cat and always just showed up for food. The last time I could recall feeding him was the same night my boyfriend left. A little irritated, I texted my ex asking if he had taken Cheddar, but he just left me on red. I half expected him to, because we didn't end on good terms. Figuring that he likely took Cheddar, I continued my search and found my stuff bare before retiring to bed. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound coming from outside my bedroom and expected it to be Cheddar returning late. So I got up and placed a bowl of cat food near the windowsill. When I peeked out of the curtains to call out to him, my blood ran cold. There was a shadow of a man standing right against the window, hands pressed against the glass, trying to see inside. In addition to being engulfed in darkness, he was also dressed in all black, and a hood was pulled over his head to cover his base. He saw me and immediately bolted away. Terrified, I made sure to lock every door, and there was no signs of attempted entry. I called the police, and they sent out a car to circle the block, but because there was no evidence of a crime being committed, a patrol car was the extent of their help. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night. And when I dragged into work with baggy eyes, Paul went through every effort to cheer me up. "Do you want coffee?" He trailed after me as I started with stock control. "Did they get the guy? Do you feel scared?" He persisted, and I was starting to get annoyed. I don't know why I told him what happened. "Are you all right?" he asked, while following me to the head office, and I felt myself finally about to snap. I turned on my heels and shouted at him. Yes, okay, I'm okay. No, I don't want coffee. Now go, you're supposed to be on the floor stacking the pallets that came in this morning." You could see from his expression that he was just bewildered, maybe even hurt. I never yelled at people. It was so much worry about it, I just lost it. Paul visibly sank in dejection and walked away like a child who had just been told off, which instantly made me feel bad. The rest of the day was busy, yet I preferred it so. I went home while reciting an apology that I would give Paul the following day, when I felt more refreshed after some sleep. Our Secret Santa exchange was the next morning, and my guilt increased tenfold when Paul walked up and handed me this neatly wrapped gift, revealing that he was my Secret Santa. "I think you'll really like it. It's something you've probably missed," he declared with a clear sincerity, his head slightly dipped forward and his gaze nervously scanning the ground. I thanked him and apologized profusely, which didn't seem to impact him whatsoever. He soaked away, and I knew I'd have to do better to make it up to him. During lunch hour, I decided to grab Paul a meal and hopefully clear the air. I didn't like working in an unpleasant atmosphere. I left my office and ran into my female colleague carrying a gift bag. She presented it to me and said that she was my assigned Secret Santa. A little confused, I thanked her and retreated to my office to find Paul's gift on the desk, still unopened. I quickly moved to unwrap it. With every piece of paper I unfolded, the present emitted a putrid smell that only grew stronger. Curiosity alone made me open the box, and I caught a glimpse of a ginger fluffed covered in red liquid. Inside the box was my cat, Cheddar, with a knife impaled through his neck. I vomited all over the office floor and remained sick for days after. Paul was nowhere to be found. His name wasn't on company records, and he was never even an employee. When I questioned the staff members, they told me that he acted very hostile towards them and presented himself as an entirely different person in my presence. He also claimed to be my assistant, and they thought nothing more of it. As strange as it might have sounded, I never got the impression that Paul's gift was intended to be malevolent. Thinking back on how he handed it over to me with his downcast expression, He acted like he truly thought I'd like the present. I can only ponder if, in his twisted mind, he actually believed it to be a thoughtful favor. When I was around 14 years old, back in the late 90s, there was a girl my age living down the street. We walked to school together often, and she very obviously liked me. My high school years revolved around my 3 friends and our nerdy game of Dungeons and Dragons, so I had no interest in dating. Kathy's obsession with me surpassed any type of little crush, but I can't remember exactly how it started or why she was infatuated by me. She was probably out of my league, with her dark, beautiful eyes and curly brown hair. I was not a boy that girls chased after, nor did I desire the attention. I suppose it was flattering to have someone like me, but I was still annoyed that Kathy began showing up to our game nights. She asked for an invitation from my hormonal friends. Thus, I sat opposite Kathy every Friday night while she stared at me instead of focusing on our fictional storyline. She also ruined many sessions by not adhering to the rules. She played a fairy character, and whenever I saw her place the dreaded figure on the board, I internally cringed. Kathy made her hero infinitely powerful, violating combat rules and arguing any attack against her. My friends tolerated it, sometimes even defending her exploits. I knew Kathy wasn't there for the game. She was there to invade my personal space. This much became apparent one night, a few days before Christmas. From the moment we started setting up the board, Kathy insisted we should go out instead to look at decorated houses and sing some carols. That night was my turn to be the dungeon master, meaning I decided on events during our adventures on the board game. I told her that she was free to go out, but we had quests to complete. Kathy's love for Christmas luckily exceeded anything she felt for me, because she gave me a dirty look and told me that I would probably regret this and left. We carried on with the game and killed her character off during the episode, which went against rules, but she broke plenty more. As petty as it was, I went to bed just past 1 a.m. feeling satisfied with myself. I climbed under the sheets with a happy sigh. Then I felt something bumpy under my pillow. When I lifted the cushion, I found the figurine of Kathy's D&D fairy character laying there. I picked it up and inspected the statue, noticing that the wings had been broken off and the plastic eyes carved out. Even though I had essentially removed her character from our game, this was a bit excessive, if not disturbing. After I sat back up, I could hear a quiet hum in the distance. It sounded like Kathy murmuring a Christmas carol. Considering how late it was and my parents being asleep, I freaked out. Still, I checked my window and confirmed my fears. Kathy was standing outside in pitch darkness, singing in a low whisper. She was wearing a Christmas dress, and her eyes met mine. Even in the dark, I could see her smirking. She sang every lyric of a carol in an eerily slow pace. On the second day of Christmas, I true love brought thee. She paused and lifted her backpack, retrieving something that I couldn't make out in the poor light until it struck my window. I jumped as the dead turtle dove made an impact with the glass, and blood splattered everywhere. Kathy immediately reached into her bag just as I went to open the window. I noticed it was already opened by a crack. She must have snuck in to plant the figurine under my pillow. I swung the window open and called out to her in a loud whisper. "What are you doing, Kathy?" Go home. She held up a second dead bird by its legs as her wide eyes, encircled with dark rings, bore into me. Her face carried no emotion when she hurled the dove straight at me. It went past my head and landed inside on my bed, feathers and blood stained on my sheet. Up close, I could see that she'd butchered the poor thing. Much like her board game statue, the wings of the bird were ripped off, the eyes were gouged out, and she had sliced it open from below the beak, vertically down the neck and breast. The bird's organs peeled from the wound, and a rotten smell filled the room. Terrified and pissed off, I looked back up to cuss her out just as she walked off, humming a very haunting carol that decreased in volume the further away she got. Afterwards, I had to take a shower, washed my bed, although the memory of the event still kept me from sleeping that night. The following afternoon, my friend showed up at my door with a smiling Kathy accompanying them. They felt bad for killing her off and agreed to go caroling. They applied enough peer pressure to have me join as well. As we walked down the street, I felt her constant burning gaze on me. I knew you'd regret passing on Christmas lights and carols. She beamed a knowing smile and slipped her hand into mine. I quickly pulled my arm away and anxiously turned back on the sidewalk. My friends called after me as I sprinted home, and Kathy screamed at the top of her lungs. When I looked back, she was on the ground, thrashing around, biting herself on her forearms and clawing at her eyes. I suppose she scared off my friends during her instantaneous meltdown, because they ran after me. We all got back to my house, where I proceeded to tell them everything. We didn't see Kathy for the remainder of the holiday. She mysteriously switched schools when the new year came around. After some time, news spread that her family was moving. On the same day, the U-Haul truck drove past my house. I found Kathy's D&D figurine, along with some white feathers on our doorstep, covered in a crimson-red substance. I suppose that was her parting gift. Now, decades later, I can only hope Kathy got the psychiatric help that she needed. When I was around 16, I remember my brother relentlessly hassling my parents for party money until he realized he needed to go make his own buck. The easiest job was at our local and shifty McDonald's, but he seemed happy enough with the amount of free time he had working part-time shifts. He met a colleague that he soon became close friends with. I'll call him Kevin for the sake of my story. Kevin was a little antisocial, a few years older than my brother, and came around the house more and more frequently. I think he lived for his job, as he was always in his McDonald's uniform. He was a typical nerd in regards to appearance. He wore thick-framed glasses and picked at his skin as a nervous habit. In contrast to his demeanor, Kevin radiated with a sense of self-confidence. He spoke out of turn and always made witty remarks. Right off the bat, Kevin crossed some major boundaries in our household. The first instance was of him coming into my room unannounced. He just opened my door and walked in to check out band posters decorating my walls. "You got great taste in music," he hummed without even properly addressing me. Even though I was just sitting at my desk doing some sketches, it was still highly inappropriate of him to walk into my room of a girl that he barely knew, especially as a guest in my home. I was annoyed, yet I thanked him and respectfully asked him to leave, which he did and even apologized. Later that day, he sent me a friend request on Facebook, and I just left it pending. I mentioned this to my parents, and they had a word with my brother. After that, Kevin stopped interacting with me, yet still visited my brother often. There was a drastic change in his attitude towards me. Whereas he used to greet me in passing, he now just smiled at me without a word. One afternoon, while I was heating up a pot noodle, Kevin and my brother came home from work and had to pass through the kitchen to get to my brother's room in the basement. I greeted them both as usual, but only my brother greeted me. When they crossed into the hallway, I looked back and saw Kevin leering at me over his shoulder. I didn't want to bother my parents with more complaints, so I just hid in my room and tried to avoid Kevin, despite it being nearly impossible while he was in my house. He sent me a message on Instagram a few hours later saying, "You look good in the kitchen. You should come work at ours." Grossed out by the message, I immediately blocked his account. But then, he also tried reaching out to me on various platforms and bombarded my DMs with very disturbing messages that said things like, "I will have you. Nobody would ever love you more. We complete each other." In person, he never spoke another word to my face, but reported his true thoughts to me via Messenger at the end of every day. No matter how many times I blocked him, he just made new accounts and carried on with the cringe irritation. One early morning, I was up late in my room, listening to music while drawing portraits. When a song ended, I became aware of a rustling sound coming from my window. It was during autumn, and the yard outside was coated in leaves, which amplified the sound of someone walking directly outside. I got up and turned down the music before going to check the window. But just as I was about to peek through the blinds, the window lifted up and a gush of wind sent my papers scattering. Kevin was standing outside. When he saw me, he quickly pushed one leg through the open window while acting drunk, then muttered an excuse that didn't sit well with me. "Your brother told me to sneak through here. He doesn't want me to wake your parents using the front door." There was no chance of this story being true, and I felt reasonably freaked out by him, trying to break into my room while everyone else was asleep. When he tried to steer his torso through the gap, I grabbed a nearby pen and lunged it into his upper leg. Adrenaline came over me, and I pulled the pen back before stabbing it into his leg again and again. I blindly perpetuated the assault, ignoring his whelps of pain, until he pulled himself back outside. I must have screamed while stabbing him, because my parents burst into the door and found me in a bewildered state. Kevin ran off, and the only evidence of him being there was the blood in my arm and the traces of it smeared across the window frame. We had the police come out to do a quick search around the yard where they made a nauseating discovery. There was a McDonald's takeaway bag tucked away beneath my window. It contained every item that you could link to an amateur murder or kidnapping. It was clearly a list of things that Kevin found on Google. For example, rope, duct tape, a bottle of chloroform, a pocket knife, and some misplaced cheeseburgers. My brother reassured me that he never instructed Kevin to enter through my room. He also quit his job a few hours later after finding Kevin at work, walking around with a limp. Both my brother and my parents wanted to file a restraining order against Kevin, but I felt too traumatized to even think about it. 3 months later, we moved a few towns over, and even years later, I still can't enter a McDonald's without associating the bright uniforms with Kevin outside my window. This happened around 2 years ago, even though it feels like only yesterday. I was a senior in high school when my single mom began struggling financially. That being the case, I started applying for jobs in the area in hopes of helping out. The only place always open to new recruits was McDonald's. It was within walking proximity, so I put aside my common misconception of flipping burgers being a loser's job and collected my red and yellow uniform a few days after being hired. I should mention that, as a gay man, I'm big on fashion, and I altered the boring pastel outfit as best I could. Although there was little I could do about the actual clothing, I made the best of what I could do to add to my appearance, such as doing my makeup properly and wearing a fun little earring to complement my curly hair. I figured that I might as well look good while doing an arguably unpleasant job. This turned out to be a big mistake. It was probably a week into when I began noticing patterns in customers. Regulars were in abundance, and one face in particular never failed to demolish my mood. I'll be vague to avoid repercussions and simplifying referring to this man as Steve. He was probably a few years older than me, skinny and short, so much so that I towered a little above him. Steve consistently dressed in all black and wore thick eyeliner. Unparalleled to his dark persona, he was overly friendly towards me. When the place was busy, he'd look over my attire with a lip curled in disgust and make quiet homophobic remarks. Yet, when nobody was around, he would awkwardly compliment me on my makeup and point out how he loved my piercings, even mentioning at times how he would give anything to see me outside of work clothes. I never acted on his comments, good or bad. He was just another customer to serve. He came in every morning for a coffee and a breakfast with muffin, but his routine abruptly stopped after about a month or so. Then he reappeared in the creepiest way I've ever seen anyone behave. Steve would show up just after dark, right before my shift ended, and stand in the window, watching me at the front counter. I'd clock out and leave through the back door, only to find Steve had moved to the parking lot, where he'd sit on his motorcycle, watching me leave. He knew which direction I walked each day, and always parked in a way so I had to pass by him. Then he'd follow the script of offering me a ride only for me to decline. This repeated every day for a scary amount of time. Foolishly, I didn't see Steve as any kind of threat, mostly due to his physical variation. Then one night, the same scenario played off again. He offered me a ride, and I gave a stern no before walking on. I didn't even walk 10 steps before hearing the motorcycle engine behind me. I turned around, and Steve fortunately sped off down the road. When I got home that night, there was an envelope on my doorstep. I opened it to find a pair of black Gothic spider earrings with a note signed off by Steve. It was a weird gift, but I knew the message behind it was the real intention. He wanted me to know that he knew where I lived. The last thing I wanted to do was stress out my mom by telling her about a potential stalker, so I complained to management at work instead. They took it very seriously and changed up my shifts so that I never had to walk home after dark. It seemed to work out, and I didn't see Steve around anymore. Then, one night, my mom was working some extra late hours, and I was home alone. I was settling down to go to bed when a knock came from the front door. I made my way to look through the peephole and saw Steve standing motionless on the doorstep. Immediately, my body began to tremble, yet my mind remained resilient. I decided not to deal with this on my own anymore, and I called the police on the spot, making sure to do it in a hushed tone so Steve wouldn't hear me. While waiting for the police, I heard Steve call my name, as he began reciting a messed up profession of love. Nobody else in this town likes your kind, but I'll endure you. The local police showed up in no time, and when a cop car came to stand still in front of the house, Steve attempted to make a beeline for his motorcycle parked in the driveway. At that point, I stepped outside and watched as they arrested him. He didn't speak a word while they cuffed him, and just stared at me with an accusatory gaze. His bloodshot eyes gave the impression that he might have been under the influence of something, and they also found a weapon on him. When they loaded him into the back of the police vehicle, an officer approached me and told me that the motorcycle wasn't registered in Steve's name. It belonged to a girl who was reportedly missing. The most terrifying discovery then came when I found out that she previously worked at the same McDonald's that I worked at. I remained working at that branch for another year and a half before starting college. In that time, I made sure to look out for my co-workers and always escorted the girls home or to their cars. I don't think anybody realized how dangerous a simple fast food job could really be. About 6 months ago, I got a job at McDonald's. I didn't feel like I needed a job, but now I was nearing my 18th birthday, and my stepmom decided it would be a good way for me to learn accountability. Initially, I hated it, though I quickly realized that it was actually nice having them managing my own money. At times, I worked the drive-thru, and that task felt extremely robotic, more so than being at the tills. I was programmed to speak my linear phrases into the microphone each time a car approached the sensor outside, and in a repetitive voice gave me their order. As a big social personality, the impersonal environment made me feel a little disconnected. One night, I was working the night shift with my coworker, Evelyn. It was just past 2 a.m., and the only customers we saw were drunk, yet unproblematic college students grabbing a quick meal. Evelyn was tending to the front counter when she looked over to me and said, "You look tired, Nathan. You can walk the drive-thru and have a rest. I doubt anyone's coming tonight." She was right about me being tired. I had a long day and was grateful for the opportunity to slack off a bit. I sloped off to the drive-thru window and sat down watching the overhead camera screens. The parking lot was vacant, and the sensor cam mounted in front of the big menus outside showed an empty lane. I was lost in thought, staring ahead when the proximity sensor went off to signal movement at the menus. I recited the customary phrase, "Welcome to McDonald's. May I take your order?" It took me a while to break my trance-like state and register that a woman was standing in front of the camera. She looked disheveled, but not homeless. She had long blonde hair and was dressed in a bright summer dress, despite it being freezing cold outside. Her hands trembled as she picked at her fake plastic nails while talking into the microphone. When I readjusted my headset, I could hear her placing an order. "Sorry, ma'am, would you mind placing an order inside the store? We can only serve vehicles to the window." It was strange for her to even try to place an order out there to begin with, but I was more concerned about her being out in the bad weather. When she heard me speak up, she momentarily paused and inched closer to the speaker box, placing her face directly in the camera lens above it. I could hear her breathing through my headset, every wheezing breath more shallow than the last. Up close, I could tell she was of middle age, and her left eye was a bit milky, likely blind, judging from a quick glance. I was about to politely repeat my request when she nodded, and the movement made her stumble backwards. She regained her balance and staggered to the front doors. I watched her on the second security screen as she entered through the door and approached Evelyn at the counter. By that time, the place was empty. The lady spoke to Evelyn, and abruptly left without ordering anything. Curious and a little confused, I slipped from the high chair and peeked around the back to ask Evelyn what the lady wanted. She seemed a little hesitant to answer, but eventually told me that the lady had asked for me by name and claimed to be my mom. Now, Evelyn didn't know me very well, but was aware of the fact that my mom had passed away when I was very young. She told me that the lady gave her the creeps and could smell alcohol on her breath. So she told her that nobody by that name works here, and the woman accepted it before calmly leaving. Although I shrugged it off, the situation made me feel uneasy, and when I retreated back to my post, I saw the woman standing outside the speaker box again. Ethan, you can't hide from me. You can't hide from me. She softly shrieked into the microphone, salivating to the point of foam gathering in the corners of her mouth. She flailed her arms around so erratically, it knocked the wig from her head, exposing a bald scalp dotted with misplaced tufts of short hair. She began pacing up and down in front of the brightly lit menu boards. But since the camera on the speaker was so small, she kept moving out of view every time she marched left and right. I didn't know how to react, while already feeling so numb and disconnected. Evelyn soon joined me in the room to observe the sheer insanity transpiring outside. We live in a quiet countryside town, and she got really scared while stating that something like this had never happened before. She locked all the doors and called the police, while I silently watched in terror as the woman continued with her meltdown. When the police showed up, they escorted her away, but since she was so polite and collected upon arrival, they didn't have any reason to make an arrest. The night was uneventful after that, and when 7 a.m. finally came around and co-workers showed up to relieve us from our shifts, I felt immense relief. Exhausted and admittedly unattentive, I walked across the parking lot and climbed in my truck. I turned on the ignition, not noticing the figure sitting on the edge of my truck's hood, and only when I'd pulled out of the parking spot, making a person fall backwards, did I notice it was the woman. She picked herself up quickly and yelled profanities, punching the bonnet with her fists and making dents in my already busted up pickup. She threw her blonde wig at my windshield. Spooked, I stepped on the gas, maneuvering out of the lot before speeding home. Evelyn called me later that day, telling me that she checked the security cameras from the night before. Apparently the woman climbed into the back of my truck and urinated in the truck box. Sure enough, the bed of my truck was soiled, and a couple of fake fingernails also littered the back. Disgusted, I hosed it off and just tried to forget about it. Luckily so far, the woman has not shown back up, but it still remains a mystery why she targeted me specifically. I now check my trunk bed every time before leaving work.